Hi everyone, nice to see you. Welcome to the International Spy Museum. I'm Amanda Olkey, Director of Adult Education at this wonderful institution, and we are so pleased to have you with us tonight for Sisterhood, The Secret History of Women at the CIA with Liza Mundy. Liza, the brilliant best-selling author of this new book, as well as others, including Code Girls, which I bet a lot of you have read, is a former staff writer for the Washington Post who writes for many publications, including The Atlantic, Politico, and the Smithsonian. And she is not alone this evening because this is the Sisterhood. She will be joined for a discussion about their personal experiences by two of the women featured in the book, Molly Chambers and Lisa Harper. Molly's work included applying new CIA tracking techniques to humanitarian missions, including finding some of the Chibok girls who were kidnapped by Boko Haram in Nigeria, and Lisa, who became the CIA's first female division chief and returned from retirement to join the hunt for Osama bin Laden. And so this is going to be an incredible conversation. And when Liza, Molly, and Lisa finish their conversation, we're going to invite you to come to one of the two standing microphones to ask your questions. You're going to be tempted to say, it's a small room, I have a loud voice, I'm just going to call out my question. But then later when we post this on YouTube, people won't know what you said. So please come on over to the microphone. We really want to hear your question. And so without further ado, over to you, Liza, Lisa, and Molly.
Thanks, Amanda.
Thank you so much for that nice introduction. I had one of my last nice lunches before the pandemic with three wonderful representatives of the Spy Museum to talk about my book when I was getting started. And I am so grateful because one of the topics they suggested was CIA wives and the history of what CIA wives contributed to espionage. And I kept that in mind, and that emerged during conversations with Lisa and many of the other people I interviewed, and became a chapter called Housewife Cover. And so thank you for that. It's sort of a bookend of my project. And thank you all so much. I mean, this is really a very special occasion. I do book talks when books are published, but it's rare to get the opportunity to share the podium with people who are in the book. And I just thank you all both so much for your service and for your willingness to share the podium and to come out from cover and talk about your rich and interesting careers. Lisa and Molly, I think it's fair to say, had never met each other before tonight. So I've interviewed them both separately many times, but this is their first meeting each other in person. But it struck me a number of times, both preparing for tonight and while I was writing the book, that they have, I think, more in common even maybe than they realize. They both were case officers in the clandestine service of the CIA. They both were recruited out of college. I'll try not to give away too much of what's in the book. And they both served in Africa, did several tours in Africa. And what was interesting to me thinking about tonight is that Lisa was recruited and served during several decades of the Cold War, and her career saw an arc, a movement into the counterterrorism era, both before 9/11 and then after 9/11 as well. So that pivot from the Cold War into terrorism and counterterrorism, whereas Molly came out of the post 9/11 environment. You were something like 14 when 9/11 occurred.
I was 14, exactly.
So something like 14.
Right.
And so really grew up and came of age in this changed nation and changed global environment and changed spy business. I mean, that was changing in some ways. And then by the time you were serving in Africa, you were doing counterterrorism work as well as traditional recruitment of hard targets from the same sorts of countries that Lisa had been working as well. So, and now we're in this confusing era where it seems like everything, World War II, the Cold War, counterterrorism, everything is just happening, and it's all relevant, and the world keeps changing, but certain things keep staying the same. And then one of the other similarities that you have is that you're both still talking to me after the book comes out. I mean, these women are masters at elicitation. Like, I'm a journalist and reporter, and we have some things in common in terms of drawing people's stories out. They are real professionals. But one of the things that authors take very seriously is the trust that your subjects place in you. A colleague of mine at the Washington Post used to say, when he was talking to someone about whether they would agree to be profiled in, often at the Washington Post magazine, a long, in-depth profile, he would say to the person, I understand this is my work, this is your life. Yeah. And we all understand that, those of us who do serious nonfiction work. We take it very seriously. Neither Lisa nor Molly saw the book before it was published. That's why I'm glad they're still talking to me. And the CIA didn't have any review of the book as well. I was never a CIA employee, so I don't have to submit to the pre-publication review. So you have that in common, that you were willing to really put yourself out there and place trust. And I think that also is an example of how you're both such game, courageous women. You're risk takers. You're not foolhardy, and so I'm just so thrilled to be here on the podium with you. So we were emailing a little bit earlier today about some of the things we're going to talk about. I don't like to do it too much because I like the conversation to be fresh, but picking up on the theme of sisterhood, which is something that I tried to talk about in the book, obviously, since that's the title. Molly, you mentioned that when you were starting your clandestine career, you actually did some research on Lisa.
I did.
And her operational career.
I did, yes.
Which is probably not something that you would have envisioned.
Know that. No.
I'm familiar with your work, as we say in the business. Yeah.
So could you talk about the circumstances under which you knew about Lisa and what you were curious to know beyond that?
Sure. So I'm 23. I'm sitting on my last and final interim, which is kind of like an internship that you go through before you get to the farm, before you're allowed to go to the farm. Mostly you answer cable traffic from the field. So it's a lot of name traces, requests for money. Can so-and-so go on vacation to this country? No, there's an op going on, whatever. A lot of downtime. And you're kind of meant to be learning on the job as well, and you have access to an incredible amount of data, for good or bad. And I was speaking with Eric Pound.
Oh, Eric Pound.
Yeah, a former. Eric Pound was this old, crusty cowboy, big guy, an AF legend, and he was brought on as a contractor to be our AF historian.
Do you want to explain what AF talks?
AF is Africa Division.
Right.
So it's the area division of CIA that's responsible for operations on the African continent and any African worldwide. He didn't have a lot to do. He mostly just sat in this little hovel and would send out emails occasionally. And so I went in there one day and I said, Eric, who can I learn from? Who's interesting? And he gave me a list of female case officers that had come through AF Division and said, just pop these in and see what you find. And I found Lisa. I was responsible for Uganda at the time, eventually my first posting, and she had been in Bujumbura, Burundi. Perfect, so I had access to all of these cables. I think I spent the better part of a week diving into everything you had done. And just, you also do it to learn how to write a cable, or you learn the tone of what happens when you can tell an operation maybe didn't go exactly as someone had planned, how that's written up. Everything is how you write it. So it was a really great learning experience for me.
Yeah. Could I talk about how I got to Burundi? Because
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So
yes.
I came in as a junior officer trainee. I was, I expected to have a career in the clandestine service, and it didn't quite work out the way I thought it would. So instead of being a case officer, I became an intelligence assistant, but I persevered. And we go to our first tour, which was in Copenhagen. They tell me, so sorry, there's no job for you. You have to resign. So I resigned. And
This is all because she got married.
it's all because, yes, because I got married and I was told, oh, you have betrayed the organization.
Wasted the training dollars.
Wasted the training. You owe us we should have you pay $30,000 back. So I'm not going to spoil some of the stuff that's in the book because I want you to read Liza's book. But anyway, so first tour with my new husband. I did some work, but it was just volunteer work, let's say. So then my husband gets sent to Bujumbura, and there really was no, I was, by then, I had resigned. There was really no thought of my working, but it was a small station in an interesting place, and they really needed somebody to help him. You know, at these little African stations, it sounds great to be COS, but you're it, and maybe you have two support people with you. And so that's when I started working on contract in Bujumbura. And I just loved it. I mean, I would think in the morning, gee, I would pay them to do this.
What did you love about it?
I love just the freedom and the initiative and the opportunity and also the responsibility you have. I mean, it's, you know, for somebody, I came in at age 21. You came in very early,
I did,
too.
21, yeah.
21, okay. And
You're so young. I mean,
Yeah, and so
these days you'd be on your parents'
Yeah.
Netflix account still, you know?
Right. So you really get to survey the scene. You find out who might be of interest to recruit. You propose to Washington how you think you could do it, and they usually say yes, and they give you a pot of money for, you know, that you have to account for. But there's just this tremendous opportunity to be creative, and so I like that. I like the fact, too, that Bujumbura was very small. So you ran into everybody all the time. I nearly got killed one day because there were two North Koreans in front of me at the post office. They actually cut in front of me. And I saw this as an opportunity to engage
Perfect.
them.
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
because North Koreans, we had a very hard time meeting the North Koreans, but they didn't like it at all. And one of them actually started to do a karate chop. And luckily, the other guy restrained him. But anyway, it's just to illustrate the fact that it was just a small fishbowl, and you could operate very easily.
That's wonderful. And so, Molly, when you started in AF, why do you think they gave you a list of female case officers when you asked for good examples? Or
AF does have a history of female case officers, and I think
Yes.
that speaks to what you mentioned. It's these small stations. No one really wants to go there. You know, if you're making a list of your top 5 places you'd like to serve and live, Bujumbura is probably not high on the list.
It was very, very basic.
It's very basic. But if you're willing to go, you can make it your own. And so I think that's why women had a lot of success in AF. And something you talk about in the book a lot, which is these very hierarchical, patriarchal societies don't really know what to do with strong officers that come in and want to recruit them or talk to them. So I could bounce between talking to the military attaché from the Central African Republic just as easily as I could go talk to his wife in the kitchen. So it was really entree into a lot of spaces that a typical John Thorne male case officer couldn't get.
you both talked about that. I mean, with decades apart in your careers, that was still the case in many of the countries in Africa.
Absolutely.
You talk about something called a third gender.
Yeah.
Yes, I think that's good.
So can you talk about that?
Sure. So the third gender is just what it seems. They don't really know what to make of you. So not only was I invited to speak on really hard-hitting stuff, right? So like I could sit with the Nigerians and talk about their military strategy for the Sambisa forest, but then I could also go chit-chat with the women who were making the coffee and ask, hey, can you, next time you make copies, can you just make an extra? And like, I'll be back next week and I'll snag those from you. I could get both.
She does this.
You could, yeah, and it worked really well.
Yeah, yeah.
It worked to my favor. I never once encountered sexism from an asset or developmental, not once. In fact, I was turned over, so an asset had been handled by a previous officer. That officer was leaving to go to another posting, so we all met. I would take responsibility for this asset for the future. He was an internal penetration of the intelligence agency in that country, and he said, "Oh, thank God, another woman." He thought it looked better to be handled, that's a technical term, by a female case officer. It looks more normal in a car, looks more normal in a restaurant. What are those two people doing? Don't know, they're probably on a date, maybe they're friends. But two men sitting in a car at night, that's a little bit creepier. You can't get away with as much.
Yeah, I'd add to that. Oops.
Just slip it back on your ear, I think. But
I'd
I'm not
add
IT
to that
specialist.
I never had a sexual approach by one of my assets.
Same, never once.
Never once. One of my favorite assets said to me, "Look, Lisa, I have 4 wives. I have 10 girlfriends. Don't worry, I don't need sex from you."
Oh, that's wonderful.
Well, he was a Muslim, so
Yeah,
yes,
yeah,
right,
yeah.
right. And you are in very.
So what did he need from you? Money and
He was a politician, and
he was a politician.
He was a politician, and his quid pro quo with the U.S. government was to have us appreciate what his party was trying to do. So it was very tricky because, you've got to watch out that what you're getting is intelligence and not propaganda from his party. But he turned out to be, it was prophetic because his party later won the presidential elections.
Perfect.
Yeah,
That's exactly
perfect.
what you want, access and placement.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So I'd say that, the circumstances of meeting, we had, for example, in Bujumbura, we had something called the mobile state house, the safe house. I would go out.
A mobile safe house.
Mobile safe house. I had a combi Camptonville. Remember those old VW campers with the pop tops?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I had that. And first of all, it's very challenging at night to meet your asset because
It's
these
awful.
are Africans.
Yeah.
And, you can tell them to carry a white briefcase or papers or something. It's very tough. So the better thing, too, is to be at a predetermined location and have them come in to your combi. You open up the side door. Well, that wasn't working too well because anybody could just walk up. So then I thought, my dogs. So I had 2 Irish setters, and I would take one of the dogs with me. He would know the asset, and he would bark if it was somebody other than my asset.
How did the dog know the asset? Like, how many times did you have to meet an asset before the dog would?
The dog was uncanny.
Oh, my God.
Or all you needed to do was to give the dog some article of clothing from the asset. So this turned out to be wonderful because, they teach you at the farm when you're meeting an asset to have amenities.
Amenities. Always amenities.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it's hard to have the amenities unless you have something like a camping car.
So an amenity is food and drink.
drinks,
and
cigarettes.
Right.
Cigarettes,
Right. Casio watch or something.
Whatever's going to
My
make this
Casio,
person
yeah,
relax.
whatever you need.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Most of the time, my assets wouldn't eat it
Yeah.
because it's fast. You're doing a debriefing and there's lots
Yeah.
to talk about, and you don't want to have. And you mentioned in the book one of my assets loved Domino's Pizza in Nigeria, which was way outside the pay grade for this guy. So every time we met, he got a Domino's Pizza. Never ate it, but took it with him. It's not my responsibility what he did with it. But it's to demonstrate, like, hey, I'm thinking about you. You cross my mind when we're not together, too. It's an element of rapport. So amenities always. You get graded on that at the farm.
So you figured out the dog thing. I mean, that wasn't something that you had been taught at the
Oh, no,
farm.
no,
You figured
no,
out
no.
that your dogs were capable of identifying an
Yeah, my
asset.
dogs were capable of doing that, and my dogs were safe. They weren't going to bite the, well, you don't have to worry. And we would just, so that's how for 3 years, that's how I met my agents.
So you were driving around in a VW camper.
So what you do, you
would
start out from your
park-
house, you do a surveillance detection route because
Right.
you had to make sure nobody was following you. And it was very easy there because the security service guys wore black pants, black shirts, and Ray-Bans. And we knew their cars. So once I knew I was clean, I would go to the predetermined site. The agent would come in, and then we'd have our meeting, and then he would depart, and I would go home.
So can you all talk a little bit more about why in Africa and then going further in your careers you did feel as though your gender gave you an advantage? I mean, being a man might be an advantage in some ways too, but there were ways in which being female was an advantage. What other examples perhaps you'd like to demonstrate, Molly?
Sure. I could get into any party I wanted anytime. People assumed I was a secretary or I was dropping something off for the ambassador. I never had an invitation to a national day. Embassies throw their national day. It's a big diplomatic cocktail party. They're terribly boring, but they're fantastic because everybody is there. It's just fish in a barrel of targets. I never had an invitation. We could crash. Lisa and I talked about that earlier tonight,
Yes,
trying to get up to this third floor, how we could gain entree.
They were working the receptionist downstairs,
Yeah, we
drawing
were.
out
We
her
were.
life
Yeah,
story.
I got
So
lots
just
of
in
info
case
on
you
her.
needed something in
Just
your
you never
back.
know.
We needed to go
Never
back
know.
and trace her,
That's right.
find out who she was.
Right.
I could rent hotel rooms very easily. People assumed I was a hooker. Didn't bother me for the purpose of the act, whatever I needed to do, not a problem. And you kind of blend in. When you walk into a room and there's a bunch of men kind of size each other up and immediately identify who's a threat, who's a target, who they might need to deal with. Not so with women. We could stand there and get anything we wanted at any time and no one would know. It was great. You want me to do the
Show
trick?
the earring thing, please.
Something I had to do a lot, I carried anywhere from 6 to 12 cell phones at any time. The trick is one op or one asset per phone.
Yeah.
You never cross phones ever. If you do, the op is ruined. So something you have to do a lot is flip out SIM cards, which everybody here probably has an iPhone. If you take a look at it on the side, there's a little teeny tiny hole. The iPhone in the box comes with the device, or you can use a paper clip. But how often do you have a paper clip on you? Literally never. But an earring takes about 10 seconds to pop out, SIM card, pop in again, put this right here. Doesn't look like I'm doing anything, right? I've done this walking, I've done this driving, anywhere. And a male case officer was with me one time and he goes, "Damn, maybe I should get my ears pierced." But yeah, you probably should, Ralph.
Some other things about being a woman is that oftentimes if you're dealing with somebody who culturally may not be really comfortable with you, you can work out what role you're going to play with them. So, for example, in the Middle East, really, you can be the mother, and this works out wonderfully, or you can be the student. For a while, I was working on things nuclear, and I'm not a scientist. I have absolutely no scientific background. But if I just played the student, I could get a tremendous amount of information. So you always, with each person that you met, you say, well, what relationship is this person going to accept? Another thing is that a lot of times expectations are low. So if you come in and you have to be absolutely prepared. This is one thing. You cannot afford to ever be unprepared for a meeting or not speak the language well or not have your requirements, the questions you're going to ask all worked out. You have to be really good. But then people think you're just a total genius when in fact you're just a good case officer. But their expectations were so low at the beginning that you're going to shine.
So, Lisa, I wonder, so you all have talked convincingly about the ways in which gender can help when you're eliciting information, targeting assets. And Lisa, though, I wonder if you could talk a bit about the attitude that pervaded when you entered the clandestine service or when you entered training. I mean, the real conviction that this was exactly what women couldn't do, that women couldn't close the deal, women couldn't make the ask. I mean, I think about it, as a journalist, you're asking someone to talk to you, to maybe tell you their life story, but you all do have to make a really hard ask of someone, to ask them to hand over secrets, to essentially betray their country. And it seems to me that the thinking when you were signing on in the late 60s was that women were not capable, just as if, that women were seen as not being able to be rainmakers in law firms or on Wall Street, the ability to have that hard conversation. I mean, you and I had a lot of conversations about that.
Right. Well, I'll say
you need
that
your mic a little closer, too. You could just hold it if you wanted to. It's right here.
I am not technical.
Well-
Oh, dear. Okay, so when I signed on, I signed on as an officer, but I was not given the complete training. There was a short course called OpsFam, then there was the long course. Well, so really, you didn't even get a chance to, to demonstrate that you could recruit because you didn't get to that part of the training. And then I found that every time I came to a station, I had to play the farm again to show people that I really knew that I could do it. And in fact, on my second tour, by then I really had a good first tour, and my second tour, the chief of station, they told me, had written 7 back channel messages saying he didn't want me. 7. And because this is the thing about Africa Division, they really support their staff. They said, no, Lisa's going.
Huh.
So I arrived, the man was furious, and he said, if you ever ask me what to do, you are out. So, think of the pressure. So I thought, well, I'm going to do it like a farm exercise. So I just did everything really by the book.
It works.
It works.
It works.
It works. I did everything by the book. And then I'd say to him, well, you have this asset here who doesn't speak, that you can't communicate with, because he doesn't speak your language. Or you have this group that you want to target, but nobody here has the culture or the historical cultural expertise to target them. And so that's how I made my way. But, and then I ended up, the reason that I finally got reinstated is that I had to go back to the farm and take the long course. Because
Having been denied it initially.
having been denied it, having spent 10 years in the field, really kind of knowing what I was doing, but I still had to go back and get that piece of paper.
Did you feel like that mindset had gone away by the time you entered the clandestine service in
2008. Yes and no. I came in, there were lots of female officers, lots of female case officers that had really made names for themselves and done fantastic work. But there still was, and still is, this pervasive sense of men and cowboys, and we're going to do it our way. And I think you get that because everything you do is secret. And something you mention in the book, too, is, and I want to make this really clear, you are an avatar to Washington. You're not written about in your true name, so you're almost a character. So whenever they read about you, they're reading small snippets of your activities, what you do. So people develop interesting ideas about you, and when you go back to headquarters and actually meet with people, they say, wow, you're totally different than in your cables. Well, yeah, I'm a three-dimensional person. You're just reading 500 words about who I had dinner with last night. And that's really hard to overcome, I think, sometimes. It was also really tough. Some of the older guys, there's a famous case officer who's now a talking head on Fox News. I won't name him. But he and the chief of Iran Operations Division at the time had a list of all the female trainees, and they ranked them by our attractiveness and then checked off whether or not they had slept with us. On my first or second week, there was a group of 4 women who were on their 3rd or 4th tour. They were probably in their 30s, and I thought they were so cool. They were really lovely to me, and they said, don't ever be in a room alone with him, ever, ever, ever. I don't care if he's giving you Russian nuclear codes, don't do it. So women kind of looked out for each other in that way by the time I was growing
They were
up.
telling you this about one of your colleagues.
About one of our colleagues.
Yes.
Not about
Yeah.
a potential asset.
Never an asset. Never had a single issue with an asset. I don't even think that would have entered an asset's mind.
No.
Yeah.
You have a different power relationship,
Yeah.
a relationship of trust, and you don't have time for sex. I mean, you're up against it. You maybe have 50 minutes with this person, and you have a whole list of things you have to
And Washington
accomplish.
always wants more. They
Yes,
always have.
right.
I've never left a meeting saying, I got everything I needed. I always thought, damn, I forgot to ask this, or why didn't I
Right,
follow that
right.
farther?
Yeah.
You don't have time.
Right.
Yeah, and the power structure is very
Right.
different.
When you talk about being an avatar, so you're out in the field, you're sending cables back to Washington. The person who's receiving your cable literally doesn't know your
Literally
gender?
doesn't know you, doesn't know anything about your story. I remember I did a meeting with an internal, he was a Congolese intel officer. He was a great guy. We did the meetings in French. There was some trouble on the border between Congo and Uganda, so he was triggering meetings constantly, every couple of nights. He would send me a signal. I'd have to go do a 90-minute SDR like you talked about, go meet him. And I had bad E. coli. I had E. coli a couple times, but I was in the health unit, hooked up to an IV, and Chief of Station came downstairs and he goes, hey, he signaled, are you good to go? And I was never going to say no. Absolutely, pull this out. Yeah, fine. What time did he say? 9, cool.
Did you really pull? You really?
I did. I really did. I was not. You can't have any weakness. If
No.
you show any
No.
weakness, they'll give it to another officer, and then you're ruined. So I did the meeting, and stuff on the border was happening, and I really thought maybe we'll get some good intel tonight. And it was a bust. He had like one small piece that was already out in press. So the whole 6-hour ordeal was for naught. And when I wrote this up, sent it in the next day, and Washington back channeled to COS and said, God, why, like, Molly's really fucking that guy up. Like, what's the point? Why are we meeting this guy? President wants this in his paper, his PDB. Is she not the right person? And I wanted to say, I was very ill. I was very, very ill. I did SDRs knowing where each bathroom was along the way for 90 minutes, an hour-long meeting, and then 90 minutes back. Headquarters doesn't see that. So they see a one-dimensional view of you. You're not a real person. You are a corporate asset for them.
But they do know your gender, so it's not like the orchestra blind auditions where they
No.
found that.
no.
Yeah.
They know,
No.
yeah.
They
And my
know,
pseudonym
yeah.
was very feminine.
Yeah.
So they knew.
Yes, so was mine. Yeah.
I was told, though, I think it was in Moscow, in the early days, there were so few women in the stations, I think it was Mike Sulik who told me this, that the few women who were there would be given male pseudonyms because if a letter came addressed to a female pseudonym, it would be obvious who it was going to.
That
So
happens.
that's-
Yeah.
Yes, one of my colleagues was known as Malcolm.
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 So that
Yes, yeah, so that if the message were intercepted, you would have a harder time figuring out who it was.
So, Molly, because you've read Lisa's story and met her, know her story, like, what did you reflect on? What has changed and what hasn't?
What hasn't changed, I think, is that freedom and that independence, the sense of opportunity.
Yeah.
I knew when I got to a station, and you quote this in the book, somebody had told me, big mistake, guys. Like, I'm here to really rock this country's world. And I did. I felt like that every time.
I feel like you alone, you were
me
empowered
alone.
to.
I am empowered. I have a car fully gassed up. I have any amount of money I could ever need. I can get a plane overhead should I need it. You feel really empowered. And with that power comes real serious responsibility, obviously. I think that goes without saying. But I felt like just through the power of my personality, I could get people to do what I needed, and that could benefit the U.S. government. And that's really potent to feel when you're 25 and by yourself in the middle of Africa, and no one knows where you are. I was friends with the SEAL team at the embassy in Uganda. They lived down the street from me. And we had plans one day. This was when Game of Thrones was really popular. We had illegally downloaded it from a Romanian VPN, but we were going to watch it at like 11 p.m. because I had a meeting. So I show up. I got there at like 11:15. I've worked from 7:30 all the way at my cover position, gone out and at my asset, made sure I was clean there, clean on the way back, get to their house. And Rob, the lieutenant commander, said, hey, do you do this by yourself? Like, who's with you? I'm like, it's literally just me. He goes, I don't go anywhere without at least 3 other dudes. I don't go anywhere without a fire team. You're by yourself. Like, he was flabbergasted that this was how we run operations. And I said, this is how it happens. But I felt a real sense I felt very empowered when I was there.
I'd like to talk too about what has changed. I think talking to people that are female case officers now, it's obvious that the society has evolved. There's much more acceptance of women. there's also institutional barriers that I felt don't exist anymore. They would never think of bringing somebody in as an officer and then make them an assistant at a GS nothing, you know. But what hasn't changed is that women are often caught, because if you want to have a life with a spouse and children, it's still a hard track to follow. Being a case officer, you heard Molly. I mean, it's sometimes 24 hours a day. I have a friend who dictated an intelligence report 2 hours after she gave birth. She'd gone out to meet her asset just before she was going to go into labor, and it was a hot report she had. So they came to her hotel room, and she delivered her report. But it's really, so a lot of women now will choose other tracks that are exciting, valuable, but it's not the case officer one.
And when
Yeah.
you say women are caught, you don't mean they're exposed and PNG'd. You
No,
mean
no.
they're
I mean,
in this bind.
They're in
Yeah.
this bind.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think you bring that out when you talk about what happened to the women during 9/11.
Yeah.
Yeah. Who had families and the sacrifices they had to make to keep working.
Yeah, I talked to Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger about her career. She had years as a case officer, and she felt that the family part of it, having a spouse travel with you, which she did have overseas, and then children, that actually being a politician, being a member of Congress, is more family friendly than
would agree.
overseas life as a
Yeah,
case
yeah, I
officer.
I can see that.
Yeah.
So how is that? I mean, what did you see in terms of solutions of that situation?
I didn't see any, frankly, and I don't like to point out a problem without offering a solution, but if let's say you meet someone while you're back here in language training. Okay, you're both here for 6 months doing language. Well, he has a commitment to go to Japan. That's the only reason why he's taking Japanese. You have a commitment to go to Maputo. It's the only reason you're taking Portuguese. So that's 2 years apart. Okay, well then, so you're thinking 2 years in the future, maybe we could do a tandem assignment at that point. But at that point, I might be a higher grade than he is, so I would be going for the COPS, Chief of Operations of a station. He can't then work under me. Is he going to stay home and not work, or am I going to stay home and not work? There is no off-ramp or on-ramp. It's really tough, and people have to make that decision early, and I think that prevents a lot of women from rising.
Yeah, women are lucky if they meet a husband with a portable skill.
Yeah.
You know, he's writing the great American novel, or he's a guitar player, you know, who sings.
Multi-level marketing schemes.
Right.
If I could just find somebody who sold Beachbody, I mean, that would have been perfect.
Right.
You can do it anywhere, but
Right.
you
Yeah.
have to have this
Right.
calculus early and often, and it could come up 2 or 3 weeks into a new relationship, and you don't want to have that conversation.
Another thing, if you're wealthy, you can have a nanny, or you can have a housekeeper. And I have friends who had very successful careers as female case officers because they had really a wife.
Yeah.
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 But when you were getting started, and maybe this is true now, men were actually encouraged to have wives and families when they were serving as case officers or chiefs
Right.
of station. I mean, the whole family would be flown, and that would enhance the cover. And I don't ever mean to imply that the work was easy for the men who were doing it. I mean, one of the consistent patterns that I heard when people were talking about their case officer, their chief of station or whatever, is alcoholism, and going to rehab, and coming out of rehab and going back to rehab, and all the alcohol. And it just seems to me, male or female, it is incredibly stressful work, and wellness is always going to be a challenge for
It's impossible.
for both genders, right?
Yeah.
But it does seem as though there was at least an era where the assumption was that the male case officer would have a wife and a family, and they would all be flown over. Does that? But if you're a female case officer, presumably the agency would still do that. You just have to have a willing partner who is portable. And in this day of hybrid work and working online and Zooming and everything, do you think it's going to get more feasible?
It could, but when I was in Khartoum, the internet was out 5 out of the 7
Yeah,
days in a
of
week.
course,
So
right.
if you're,
Right,
you know,
stupid question,
working
yeah.
remote for Deloitte,
Yeah.
you're SOL.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really tough.
Yeah.
You know, there's more I think, to consider than just who's going to have primacy in the career. It's what the lifestyle is going to be like, how far away are you, what are the medical situations on the ground. Can you even, a lot of tours you can't bring a spouse.
Yeah.
A lot are unaccompanied or adult dependent only. So great, your husband can come, but what about your 2 kids?
And
You can't sign up for
I don't
those.
know if it's still true, but in the old days, you could not go to what was the Soviet Union or Eastern Europe, and both people have a job, because if one is P&G, the other one, if, is declared persona non grata and has to leave, the other person would have to leave too.
So then station is down, Patrick
So
Mahomes
I was a
and
Russian
Travis
speaker.
Kelce.
I would have loved to have, I would have loved to have served in anywhere where they spoke Russian, and we never could get 2 jobs together. So
It's really tough calculus.
yeah.
So I'm going to open it up for questions in just a few minutes, and I wanted to, well, I'm going to put you on the spot.
Sure.
We were talking about at the beginning how you researched Lisa's career in order to get tips, inspiration. She's legendary. I mean, she really is legendary.
Truly legendary.
And I'm sure you learned from it. Well, when we were chatting before the event, Lisa was talking about your uncanny skills at elicitation, and I mean, to have Lisa say that is
incredible
is
praise.
quite
Thank you.
something.
Well,
I mean it.
So when I was interviewing Molly, and she was talking about the again making that ask, you were talking about somebody you had recruited, a woman, and you were friends. You had been friends, and you had been sort of assessing her, and then you wanted to turn her into an asset, and you started, you just like switched on
I
the
went
switch,
right into it.
and I was like, and so could you just do that again?
Sure.
Okay.
I'll recruit Liza.
Okay.
Liza, I got the book 2 weeks ago, got an advance copy, and it's truly fantastic. I really can't thank you enough for taking our story so seriously. It's been incredibly healing for me to get to talk about it like this. One thing you and I talked about is how much you want to advocate for women. And so something I haven't told you is that in addition to my responsibility as a consular officer at the embassy, I'm also a CIA agent. You and I have grown together over the last year. We've had so much fun. Do you remember when we went to that water park down in Jinja on the Nile? And as you and I have developed a relationship, I kept thinking to myself, God, there has to be a way that we can get the kind of information and the way that you put information together to Washington to make a difference. So what I'm offering you today is to work for me, work through me. Our relationship will change. We'll no longer get to do mani-pedis and go to Jinja. I'll teach us how we're going to meet. But I think it would be a really wonderful opportunity for you to make a really big difference. And in exchange for what is a big decision, CIA will help pay for Ben's college. Now let's talk about that. And then you wait for them to answer. And you have to get an answer right there. And then you conveniently whip out a secrecy agreement and have them sign it.
Oh, really? A secrecy agreement?
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
They're not binding. It's not like an NDA, but it's the mental thing of like they're signing up with the CIA.
Wow.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Works really well. I use them
Yeah.
in every recruitment.
I found that when I got to the recruitment point, they already knew what was
Yes.
coming. They already knew.
If it was a surprise, you had messed up along the way.
And one guy said to me, "Okay, Lisa, I know what's coming. I will do anything for you."
Perfect.
Yeah. Perfect. Another time, though, I got to the pitch, and it was a woman, and she said, we're good friends, and I will tell you whatever I can, but I will not accept to work for you. And you accept that, too.
Yeah.
And sure enough, we continued to meet, and what she had was so important that it was still disseminable to the intelligence community, but I never was able to recruit her.
But she effectively was working. I mean, if she was giving you what she would have given you anyway, right?
Yes, but she wasn't. We like to have people under control,
Right.
Yeah. But no, we never had a formal relationship.
Well, it's it's remarkable, a remarkable skill that you all both, I think, innately had, because you were both recruited. You both got that call, that letter, I mean, you were spotted, and you were recruited.
They do it right back to us, too.
Yeah, right.
And so somebody saw something in you and then developed it, and it's just remarkable and very fun to talk about it with the knowledge that it's also very serious work, and we
Yeah,
talked
it is.
about that as
Yeah.
well. And so thank you so much for this. Has been so enlightening and so much fun, and I would like to open it up to questions. I'm sure
Please.
we've got 15 minutes, so I'm sure that somebody out there has got to have a question, and if you don't mind coming to one of the microphones, we'd love to hear it. So do you mind coming to a microphone, just so that everybody can hear?
So could you talk about how you were recruited from college?
Sure.
Could you repeat the question?
Could we talk about how we were recruited?
Okay.
I was recruited out of UC Davis when I was 21. I was a junior. I was a mediocre comparative economics student, basically flunking out. My dad called and had a very sit-down dad talk and said, you got to get your grades up. So I decided to take Arabic.
Because that was a good way to get your grades up.
Well,
Yeah, right.
I thought, like, I need to have something marketable. And I was this weird kid who would, like, research Mac v. SOG instead of going to prom, like, very bizarre. But I was also working at the on-campus recruiting station where, like, Enterprise and Target come in to do initial first-round interviews. And I was friendly with the FBI recruiter who must have told the CIA recruiter about me because I was standing in the parking lot of my sorority house having a parking lot party, which is not a tailgate, different nomenclature. And she called. And so I played along. She said, hey, we're here, you're interested in the CIA. And I thought this was an elaborate prank, but luckily I kept my wits about me and I went through the interview. I went through 9 rounds. They flew me out. And I did it. And I was an intern for summer and then fall semester. Went back to school. They said, if you can graduate by June, you can be in the next class. And I was determined. So I did it. And 2 weeks later, I was getting sworn in the bubble.
What was your
Wow.
motivation? Was it because by the time you were being recruited, there were spy shows, right? Which was something that wouldn't have been the case
Yeah, right.
for you. And so there was some glamorization.
Absolutely.
So was it 9/11? Was it popular culture? Was it your own sort of nerdy interests in whatever?
Mac v. SOG, which
Yeah,
was
exactly, yeah,
the
right.
precursor to Special Operations Group in Vietnam. My dad and I watched Alias every Sunday night, every single Sunday night. And I thought it was the coolest thing I'd ever seen. And when I realized that real people did it, and not just white guys who went to Princeton, I thought maybe I have a chance. What's the worst that happens? They don't want me. That's okay. And it was also a sense of, I need to do something too. The global war on terror had been going on for about 10 years at that point. I watched the towers fall when I was a freshman. The Iraq war started, and I thought, maybe I could do something, maybe, if they'll have me. And it turns out I could. And I think one thing a farm instructor told me was, you're not the best, you're just the best who showed up, which was typical of farm, tough
Yes,
love.
yes, yes.
But I think it's true. None of the people that work at CIA are extraordinary. They just are dogged and determined and do it anyway, even when it's hard.
And can you talk about your recruitment?
Okay, well, this is sort of funny because all right, picture Vietnam War, Brown University, very, very far left. And I'm the daughter of a foreign service officer. My dad's in Saigon. I spend my summers in Saigon. I have a slightly different view than the people on campus. And I tried once to talk about Vietnam, and I got shouted down. Now, so I guess I came that way to the attention of the CIA, and in the form of a college professor who was scared to death because in those days you weren't supposed to recruit on campus. But he brought me into a room and he said, do you want to work for the CIA? And I said, well, why not? I mean, my father had said to me, State Department officer, you know what? I think that there are better employment opportunities for women in the CIA than there are at state.
Huh.
Yeah. And he'd also said, you're not the personality type for state. So,
No,
no.
not at all.
No. So then after that, there were two recruiters that came up, one for the analytical side, the other from the ops side, and they fought with each other. And I kept saying, no, I don't want to do Chinese order of battle. I want to be a case officer. And they finally heard me. And so here I am.
Any other questions, I hope?
Hello, hi.
Hi.
I'm just curious to know more about how you turned assets and whether any of them ever called into question, like, your time before they knew you worked for the CIA. 'Cause it sounds like you said that they knew by the time you asked them. And so I was just wondering just more about that relationship, because in my head before you said that, I was like, oh, would they ever just be like, I'm calling everything into question, like I can't trust them because they lied this whole time kind of thing? Or have you built up such a rapport whereby by the time you got to that point, it was like, I trust you so much that like I will continue to give you this information? So I would just love to know more about that relationship and kind of building that out.
Sure. So the question is, did an asset, when encountering the pitch, were they ever frustrated because we had lied to them throughout the course of the relationship? Yes and no. You take that heavily into consideration. When you write your recruitment pitch, you mock it all out, and there's a section in there called blowback, which is how will they react? What happens if they decide to say no? Are they going to go right back and tell their intel reps that they've been approached? So you really think through that. And the way that I got around it was generally, if it came up, was generally by saying, listen, this is something that I take really seriously. At the time, my sisters didn't even know. I take your safety and the safety of our future relationship so seriously, I wasn't willing to disclose that quite yet. And I want you to know that when you and I work together in this organized way as a spy and as a case officer, that's the kind of mentality I will take into everything you tell me. So you can flip it to your advantage, but it did occasionally come up.
Yeah. I think that, but it's all about having prepared the way and finding the right time for the pitch. You have to, so that you really try to minimize the blowback that could happen. And by the time you're there, I've never had it. I've actually never had anybody turn me down.
I did.
Yeah.
I did. I had a
Right.
denied pitch.
Except for
Yeah.
that one
Yeah.
lady who said, "Oh, okay, I'm not in for the spying, but I'll tell you my secrets anyway."
Works for me.
Well, so you're taught to envision what your pitch is going to be.
Oh, you think of it? Yes.
Right, but also what the blowback could be.
Yeah.
Like what
Right.
are blowback options what might happen that you would envision? For example, they go around telling everybody that right? They go around blowing your
That
cover?
could be.
That could be.
Maybe the amount of money you're offering isn't enough. Maybe they think that they're worth $50,000 a year, and you're like, you're a $400 a month kind of guy. That's tough.
Oh, you have to negotiate?
So
Oh,
you negotiate
often.
with headquarters. Yeah. to
You
get the
negotiate with
salary
headquarters, but
package.
you negotiate with the asset as well.
Oh, yes.
Oh, okay.
Right.
But you
Yeah.
think through every single aspect. And a lot of times you would sit and do what's called a murder board in station and practice the pitch, and then have other case officers poke holes in, what if he says this? What if he says this? And it was always the men who would come up with just the meanest ways to see if you had thought it through.
Do you have anything to add to what the kinds of blowback, what kind of
Well, no,
blowback
well,
you
you
might
could be
envision?
kicked out. You could be kicked out of the country.
Yeah.
Yes,
Right.
right.
The ultimate.
Right, yeah,
Right.
yeah,
Right.
yeah. Some would call that catastrophizing.
I think,
You're-
yeah, right.
You kind of work backwards from there.
Right.
Oh, that's so interesting. So did you find, so this incredible preparation that you do before making a pitch, did you find that it carries over into your personal life as well? Like, are you super prepared for anything that you do now? Do you make lists of, okay, this is how I'm going to do it, and this is my plan A and my plan C, and
Obsessively.
okay.
Oh, yeah.
My business partner is sitting there, and he knows that everything is talked through and organized, and there's a call before the call and there's a call after the call. And this is something I actually had to work through in therapy. Shout out to my therapist after I left, because the idea constantly that something could go wrong, what's going to happen, what should I do then, what will I do then, what will I do at that point, what's the story for that? Okay, if that happens, then I can't do C, then we have to go all the way down to K. It's constant in your head as a CO.
My own brother has told me that I'm too detail-oriented.
Yeah.
And I drive him crazy with contingency planning. I mean, you just don't lose the habits. And for example, if I see somebody 3 times.
Oh, this happens to me all the time.
I see somebody 3 times that on a route that's not particular. I mean, I can't explain why. I'll start wondering.
Yeah.
You know,
Are you being surveilled?
am I being surveilled?
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
It's terrifying.
It is.
Because the only thing that I had heard conversation about is what they call case officering somebody. Like if you
Oh, yeah, that's
if you
the
started
bad side.
working on
That's a bad
people in
thing.
real life and supposedly you're not supposed to
No.
do that.
No.
But I would think that might be hard to turn off also.
It's a pejorative to case
I
officer
know,
somebody.
yeah.
It's seen as just rude and like off-putting, and case officers can spot it a mile away.
Yeah.
And so you do not do it. It's an extreme faux pas at the agency.
Oh, no, but even outside the agency, you know, you've got to have your ethics, and you do not manipulate your friends. You don't use these skills on your friends and family, punto.
But if you all were downstairs eliciting information from the receptionist in order to just
chatting. We're just talking.
recreational,
Yeah.
I mean,
So fun.
They did
No,
not
it's
get in.
interesting.
They did
Yeah,
not
it's-
get in.
Exactly.
No,
It's
no,
your-
yeah.
It's your natural personality, I would think, but now it's been turned into a professional
It's fascinating
asset.
what people
Yeah.
will tell you
Yeah.
with little
Yeah.
to no prodding.
Yeah. Although, interestingly, those of you who read the book will know that Lisa retired at a certain point in her career, and then you were in retirement, recovering from some medical issues, and then looking for a job, and you were offered sort of a Beltway Bandit consultancy kind of job, where you would be, what he said that you were, what was the term that he used?
He said that I was a natural opportunist.
Ooh,
Yeah.
it's a nice way of putting it.
Yeah,
Right,
yeah. So he wanted you to use those skills,
He wanted
understandably.
he wanted me to use the skills,
Yeah.
and he wasn't paying very much. And so when the counterterrorist center called me and said, one of my old colleagues said, "Look, you've got to come help us. We know something is up." And so then I dropped everything, and it was, you know, going back to my true calling. I really was glad I did it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're all glad that you did it. Any more questions? Okay.
Well, were you waiting to ask a question? Sure, why not? I thought the lady standing. Yeah, you are there.
Oh, okay.
Molly knows me and probably knows that's what it's like working with me. So I actually have a different question for you. You both talked about your experience in the CIA, but you've both been out for a little bit. In corporate America, or even as a civilian, what have you noticed as a difference as being a woman in the workplace there versus your time in the intelligence community? Apologies for being eager.
Oh.
That's a good question. So the question is, what's it like to be a woman in the workplace outside of CIA? Do you want to go first?
No, you go first because you're in business. I've been teaching, so.
So my first experience outside was at Morgan Stanley, private wealth management in San Francisco, which was an abrupt transition. Kevin and I worked together there, and one of the first things I noticed was that no one spoke to each other. In station, and particularly in Africa, the physical space is tiny. Probably about a quarter of the size of the stage, 5 people sit in it, you sit in a bullpen, everybody's there, there's no walls around. You talk constantly. You talk about operations, you talk about what's going on. And I was on a big trading floor, and you could hear a pin drop. No one spoke. And Kevin and I immediately kind of recognized each other. He's a veteran, and I had just come from CIA, and so it was kind of, it was nice to have a friend who would speak to me, But they thought, if I tried to talk to any of the other advisors, they thought I had an angle, like I was trying to poach one of their clients. And I'm like, no, brother, we just sit 4 feet apart for 9 hours a day. I hear your phone calls with your wife, and I think it's weird that I don't know where you live. So that was a rough transition.
Yeah, I would agree. I miss the collegiality.
Yes.
I love my colleagues, you know, and I also miss the excitement, frankly. You know, teaching French at Ollie's, not quite the same thing. Even though I love what I do, I miss, and I also miss the sense that I'm working for something bigger than myself. You know,
Yeah.
the sense of mission is something that you don't, it's very hard to recreate anywhere else. I
There's
think.
an intimacy, too, that you develop with CIA colleagues because you need it for self-preservation, and you don't have that with, you know, the tech support guy at Morgan Stanley. So he was wonderful, but
Yeah.
I'm just missing something.
So the question over here? Was it? Oh, sorry, please.
Thank you so much for your time, and apologies, I did come in a bit late. I wanted to ask you, in your training and in your career, you've been taught and hardwired to be observant, be perspective, always kind of, I guess, when it comes to information, that there's something you don't know that you need to find. When I think of kind of the general mindset of the nation at large, if not the whole world, the shift has switched to being that everyone thinks they know everything all the time. And my question for that point is, how, as kind of with this kind of perceptive training that you have in this observance, how do you think that this is something that could change, that could not change? I mean, I'm always thrilled to come in here and see kids running around and seeing kind of what they don't know, because that stays with you. So I'd say, do you think that that's something that might change, or that we're kind of in the age of know-it-alls?
So the question is, everybody thinks they know everything all the time now. So how do you maintain a sensitivity or a curiosity, maybe? I would say there were several nights when I thought I had a shit hot intel. Like, oh my God, this is going to change what Obama does tomorrow. And I would come back in from the op and I'd be like so pumped. I would look at my notes, which are all chicken scratch because you're driving in the
Yes,
dark,
right.
and he doesn't really speak English that well. And I would have them all organized, and I'd go in and I would tell the analyst, all right, you are not going to believe it. And she would go, oh yeah, that came out in press 15 minutes ago. So all of my work for naught. So the thing that I learned is, for lack of a better term, always look for the new shit coming to light, because there always will be something. And I think if we approach information or public discourse with a little bit more curiosity and a little bit more kindness, which is what you do when you
Yes.
elicit,
Yeah.
I think we'll all be better for it.
Yeah, I would say that once you may think of yourself as, you know, knowing everything, but when you go into CIA training, you're going to learn that there are a lot of skills that you don't know, and that very few people know. And it's gotten ever since I retired, it's gotten even more complicated.
Absolutely, yeah.
But you do have to be, you know, you have to have the sense of a reporter. You've got to keep up with the news, because you know, that'll keep you maybe from
Yeah.
getting a report that's already out. You're also have to be a technician now. You have to, because you're using very sensitive technical gear. You have to have an outgoing personality. I'm what they call a highly compensated introvert. I've learned to do this job, and I like it because it takes me out of myself. So there's a whole lot of skills. You know, observing is one thing too. I really enjoy really being able to capture what's going on in the room, you know. And so I think that these are skills. Every skill has a dark side, but I think that on the whole, these are good skills to have.
That's great. Okay, two more questions, yep.
I was curious, following up on that, were you all hyper-organized people before you got training, or which skill did you have that was a natural, was it the
So
curiosity?
the question is, were we hyper-organized, or what skill transferred or maybe was exacerbated by our farm training? That's a great question. I think it really highlights what you're good at and also highlights what you're really, really bad at. I'm very organized. I keep detailed notes. I shared a lot of these with Liza. Weird little cryptic messages to myself. I'm a bit of a paper hoarder, so I keep everything that I've ever written on. And that had to be trained out of me, because if you, let's say I'm coming back from a meeting and I have all of these notes, all of these documents, and I get stopped at a checkpoint, how am I going to explain that? I can't have it.
You're journaling.
Even my journals,
Yeah.
the journals that did not leave my quarters, I still would not use people's real names. I would have like an idiosyncratic way of categorizing dates, events. So I think they take every aspect of you and tweak it to make it better for the mission. But I still use lessons I learned at the farm all the time today.
Yeah,
Were you organized before?
I wasn't as organized as I had to become. Organized. You have to develop terrific memory, because as Molly was saying, if you don't have that memory, and sometimes you can't read your notes because you've written them in the car in the dark, so you have a good memory, you have a good visual memory, you develop instincts. For example, I used to be able to tell if my asset was going to come to a meeting or miss it.
Same.
It
You
was
get a
just
feeling.
I'm
right
sorry, if they were
beforehand.
going to come from what?
Come for a meeting, if they're going to show up or not.
Oh, okay.
It was just an instinct.
Wow.
You develop an instinct about people. I was known in Spanish as la brujita, which means a little witch, because I would meet somebody and I would say, oh my God, this person has a problem with this. And then the psychologist would go over it and they'd say, how did you know that? And I don't know how I knew it. I just had the feeling. Now, of course, you have this feeling and then you have to validate it, because nobody's going to accept just your woman's instinct. But it really served me very well.
Hi, thank you both for this great conversation. Thank you for your service. Just out of curiosity, and within the limitations of this room, of course, just can either of you share a moment you felt most accomplished in your work? I know Molly, you mentioned having shit-hot intel. If you could share more details. Thank you.
So the question is, what was the moment that you felt most accomplished in your work? If you'll indulge me, I have two. The first is my hard target recruitment. The day that we said goodbye, he was going back into his country. We had worked together for a year. He had all the money. He had a recontact plan. He had everything. We were sitting in a car, and for the last few minutes of the meeting, we both just kind of sat there in silence together. And I wanted to instill to him, and this was all real, the emotion was all real, how valuable his contribution was going to be, had been, and that I knew what he was going up against. He was going to be alone. He could not contact us until he came out. We didn't know if that was going to be in 6 months or 6 years. So that relationship was one of my most proudest moments. And then I think I felt most accomplished, actually, the day that I left. Because you are taught, like they said, they were going to make you pay back the training money, that you will have no value outside of CIA. That this is it. This is the penultimate of your life. And if you leave, you will be worthless and nothing. And it took me 18 months to have the courage to leave. But the day that I left, I was really proud of myself for coming to that knowledge internally and being brave enough to do it. So.
Yeah, mine is similar. It was a really good recruitment that made a difference in U.S. foreign policy, because that's what we're all looking for. We're looking for that piece of intelligence that you can't get anywhere else. It's going to go straight to the president's desk. Yeah. And so imagine, I'm at one of these awful cocktail parties, and this man walks up to me. I don't recognize him. And he says, can we meet somewhere else? So then I find out a little bit about him. And it turns out it's somebody that we've been very interested in, but we couldn't figure out a way to get to him. And he says to me, and so then later, so I decide that from the very beginning, we're going to use Moscow rules. I'm going to tell just one person, my chief of station, and everything else is going to be hidden. And in fact, there was a terrible compromise in our station, and we lost most of our assets, but not this person. And to this day, actually the person now is served the U.S. for an incredible amount of time. He's now resettled in the U.S. with, PL 110 with his family. And I'm not allowed to contact, I can't contact, but I've always wondered, how is he? Because I was very close to this person. Yeah. So close, in fact, that when his wife asked for 40 yards of chintz, I found a way to get 40 yards of chintz.
Of course you did.
I did, yes, up 4 flights of steps, and then he decided, oh, well, that might blow my cover. And I thought, well, yes, too. Where did he get So anyway, that's it. I think it's all about the assets that you recruit or that you handle that make a difference in this world.
Well, that is a wonderful note to end on.
Wait.
We got
we
one
have
more.
a John and Mendez question.
Okay.
Yeah.
Not so much a question, but just a statement. I brought your book with me. I'm halfway through it. I recognize a lot of the names in it. I just thought I'd point out that looking at this group of women, CIA, on the stage, is quite a different view than if it was chairs occupied by CIA men. So I was there for 27 years. I was a woman in a technical office, always told that it wasn't enough, that I wasn't enough, that the men would never listen to me, that I couldn't have a career. But what I'm watching with you guys is what I always knew I had. It was a kind of soft power because I was a woman, and I could reach out to the assets that the men around me had trained, and they wanted me to come back. I cared about them. I cared about their kids. I cared about their lives, and I would die on a sword protecting them, and they knew that. But I don't think they knew that with the men. So I think you're doing a great service to the role of women in this work, and it's great to hear you.
Thank you so much.
Well, I can't thank you much more than that, but this has been so interesting, so great. The book is wonderful. Liza wrote it. She will sign it. There's no shame if you want to ask Molly and Lisa and even Jana to sign it as well.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for being here this evening. We will post this on our YouTube channel eventually. So if you have friends that should have come, you can direct them that way. So thanks, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for coming.
And they'll be out in the hallway signing.